Mark chapter 5, and it's been a week, right? As you open up to Mark chapter 5, maybe you want to remember what we were talking about last week. Last week, Jesus was on the water with his disciples, and as they went from one side of the Sea of Galilee to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, Jesus called them to do it at night. And so it's dark, and in the dark of night, the storms begin to rage. The wind blows, the waves are breaking over the boat, and Jesus calms the storm. He says, "Quiet, be still," and the winds stop howling, and the waves stop breaking over the boat. It's still, it's calm. And the disciples are left in awe. They're wondering, who is this that can control the wind and the waves? And we talked about what that meant for his character last week. I mean, only God has power to control creation, right? And here Jesus is commanding the wind and waves. And so if you think about it like that, it's telling us pretty clearly that Jesus is God incarnate. He has power over the wind and the waves. But the disciples left us with that question that I also want to consider this week as well. Who is this? Right? Mark is trying to let us know who is Jesus and what has he come to accomplish. And each miracle, although I believe they truly happened, help us to see a different part of Jesus' character, who he is and how he relates to us. And so I was just thinking this week about the disciples, because as we go into the next story, they're there, but they're not there, right? They just don't show up in the story, but we know that they crossed the sea with them. And I wondered, as I was going through this story, what the disciples may have felt as they went to this strange place and encountered a strange character, and Jesus did a strange thing. And I wonder how they might have felt in Mark chapter 5. In this story, Jesus runs into an extreme demon, and he is so much more powerful than the demon. That's the wonderful thing about Jesus. You take nothing else home tonight, just remember that Jesus is more powerful than an army of demons. But let's go ahead and read the story. It's in Mark chapter 5. It has 20 verses, and I'm just going to read it real quick and just imagine, if you will, what it would have been like to be one of those disciples who they don't typically go to the side of the sea where the Gentiles are. Imagine how they might have felt. Here's what it says. They went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. The man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with chains, for he had often been chained hand and foot. But he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" The man, "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. A large herd of pigs were feeding on a nearby hillside. The demons begged Jesus, "Send us among the pigs. Allow us to go into them." He gave them permission, and the impure spirit came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. Those tending the pigs ran off and reported this to the town and the countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed with a legion of demons sitting there, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man and told about the pigs as well. Then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, "Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him. And all the people were amazed. There's this story, and I asked you just think about what the disciples might have felt. See, the disciples are good Jews, good first century Jews. They don't associate with Gentile people, right? They also don't eat pigs. because that is an unclean animal, right? If they could pick an animal that would jump off the side of a mountain into the water, they would probably pick pigs, right? And imagine this. They're in the region of the Decapolis, which means 10 cities, and it's 10 Gentile cities. The disciples, who don't often associate with Gentiles, cross the sea, and as soon as they get out of the boat in a strange area they're very uncomfortable with, now a man comes down running out of, and he's probably naked because when they see him later, he's dressed and in his right mind. So imagine how they might have felt. Strange place. They just calm the storm. They show up to this strange place, and now a man is running down naked and screaming. And they must be thinking, let's get back into the boat and get to the other side, right? Because for the Jews, this man is contagious. He lives in tombs. I don't know if you guys understand. Tombs are where they keep dead people. He lived with dead people. And they're looking at him, they're impure spirits, the naked man running, and they probably thought, let's get out of this place. Let's go to the other side. But isn't it great that God's mercy goes to the other side of the sea? I mean, often we want to keep Jesus to where we think he should be, the acceptable places. But God's mercy extends beyond the acceptable places to the places that, well, there's impure spirits and naked men sleeping in tombs. I mean, that's God's mercy. They should have expected it. Jews wouldn't have crossed the sea to get there, but they should have expected it because God said this is the kind of thing that the Messiah would do whenever he showed up. So let's look at Isaiah chapter 65 and just listen to this. This is God as he's talking about him coming. He's coming, and he's talking about showing up in the Messiah and revealing himself. So Isaiah 65 verse 1 says, I revealed myself to those who did not ask for me, those Gentile nations that did not ask for me. I was found by those who did not seek him. To a nation that did not call my name, I said, here I am, here I am. Do you see God revealing himself to nations, to Gentiles? And why does Jesus go to the other side of the sea? To reveal himself to the nations. And this is what it says. It says, all day long I have held out my hands to an obstinate people who walk in ways not good, pursuing their own imagination, a people continually provoking me to my face, offering sacrifices in gardens and burnt incense on altars of bricks, who sit among the graves and spend their nights keeping secret vigil. Where did this man sit? Among the graves, keeping vigil. He who eats pig's flesh. What does Jesus cast into the ocean? The pigs. And whose pots had broth of impure meat, who say, keep away. Don't come near me, for I am too scared for you. Sacred for you. I'm too sacred for you. Such people are smoke in my nostrils, a fire that keeps burning all day long. You see, God had already said that he was going to go to these Gentile nations, these impure people that eat pig's flesh and hang out in the tombs. They should have expected it. See, when Jesus, the Messiah, comes, he is the Son of God, and he is doing what God said he would do, which means going to the Gentile nations and revealing himself there. And that's exactly what he does in this story. And as he reveals himself to these people, we learn something about who Jesus is. Some things about what it means to be a follower of him, or maybe some responses. But we also learn about our enemy, the adversary, and what he wants. You guys ready to learn those things? I have a couple points. My first point is that the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. You might notice this. Jesus talks about it like this when he talks about the adversary, the enemy. By the way, Satan means one who opposes, right? And so it's an enemy, one who opposes. And he says, the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. But Jesus will later say, but I have come to give you life and to the abundance. So let's see how Satan plans on still killing and destroying this man. I mean, after all, that's what we see him doing. Just look at the description of the man. In Mark chapter 5, verse 1, they get across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. And when Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. I just imagine the scene again, and just think about this man living in isolation, all alone, right? Because for a Jew, you do not associate with people that have impure spirits, and you do not associate with people that have been in the presence of dead things. In fact, let's look at a verse that kind of points that out. In Numbers chapter 5, God has this command. And here's what he says. He says, the Lord said to Moses, command the Israelites to send away from the camp anyone who has a defiling skin disease or discharge of any kind, or who is ceremonially unclean because of a dead body. Right? So I point this out for this reason only. The fact that he lived among the tombs meant he lived alone. He was all by himself. No living person wanted to be around him. And so he was left to live in tombs where he had no human contact and set out there night and day by himself. I think the enemy, if you consider what the enemy might want out of people, it's to steal, kill, and destroy. He wants them to feel isolated, alone, by themselves. You can see it in your world as well, right? I mean, we live in a world that may not, we have so many social programs out there, media, but yet so often people sit in their homes alone in the boxes they build for themselves. And I think that's ultimately what the enemy wants. He wants you to be considered unclean. He wants you to be isolated and by yourself, because when you're by yourself, that's when he can do the most damage. Right? I honestly believe that what God wants out of us is to be part of a community. He wants us to embody Christ to one another and embody Christ to the community around us. And if you're isolated and alone, that's where Satan wants you. He wants you vulnerable. You're not vulnerable when you're surrounded by people of like faith that build you up and encourage you. You know, I was thinking about this man, and I was thinking about creation itself, and God said it is not good for man to be alone. And then he created for him a helper to serve alongside of him, and he said it was good. Right? God, that people work their best when they have companions. No companions, that's not good. I guess as I think about what Satan's trying to accomplish with this man, he wants him isolated by himself, feeling like he's hopeless. Maybe you feel like that too. There's more to it, right? It's not just the fact that he's by himself. He also has this like superhuman strength. Listen to what it says. This man lived in the tombs, this is verse 3, for no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For they had often chained him hand and foot, but he tore his chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. Now, he's got impure spirits that explains why he's got this superhuman strength. But who do you typically bind and tie up in chains? Bad people, criminals. I was thinking my dog, right? Like animals are the ones that you keep chained up, not people. People are supposed to roam the earth, right? People are created to fill the earth and multiply. They're not created to be bound by chains. Not that I'm saying dogs were either. I'm just saying that's what people do, is they bind animals. This man has been treated like an animal. And he's rejected the chains. He's isolated from the community. I think that's what Satan comes to steal, to kill, and destroy. He wants this man broken. More than that, listen to what this man does. Not only was no one strong enough to subdue him, verse 5 says, night and day among the tombs and on the hills he would cry out and cut himself with stones. The version I was reading from when I was studying it didn't say he would cry out, it said he howled. Do you guys have howled in yours? I picture this man, he's being treated like an animal. God has created mankind in his image and his likeness, and what Satan does is comes to steal, kill, destroy, and take away the image of God from this man. He is by himself, living among the dead, can't be bound, howling like a dog, and let's not forget that he's cutting himself. Often we think cutting yourself is this new phenomenon. It's really not. I mean, you can go back and read the Old Testament and you see Elijah and the Baal prophets, and Elijah's up there on the mountain and the Baal prophets are up there on the mountain and they're calling out to their God and they're cutting themselves with knives, hoping to get their God's attention. And their God, of course, doesn't answer because he has no ears. But Elijah just prays, right? And God fills the place. He burns the altar. But work in youth ministry for a while, and you'll notice that, well, kids cut themselves too. In fact, adults cut themselves. It's something people do, I'm told, to actually hide from the pain or to change the pain, because they can't take the pain that is there, but if they can put it somewhere else, maybe it'll make them feel better. They do it to escape emotional pain, physical pain. And yet, this man did it for the same reasons. He would cut himself. There's a force behind that type of behavior, the type of behavior that defaces the creation of God. There's a force behind that. Satan is the one who comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And that's what he's done to this man, right? Maybe the disciples only saw a man with impure spirits naked and running towards the boat. But I think Jesus saw somebody created in the image of God who needed help. The disciples may have wanted to get back in the boat and go back to where it was safe. But Jesus went out to meet the man. But as we think about this first point, just look at your world around you and just consider, what does Satan want? What does the enemy want out of people? He wants them to be alone. He wants them to be broken. He wants them to deface the image of God. And so often it seems successful. But that's until you meet Jesus, right? And so that's my second point. If Satan comes, or if the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy, my second point is Jesus comes to liberate and give life to the abundance. He comes to liberate and give life to the abundance. Check out what Jesus does with this man. In verse 5, it says, when he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell in front of him. Now, I don't think like he is actually falling in front of him as an act of reverence. No, I do think it's reverence. I don't think it's worship, right? He recognizes Jesus' authority and that Jesus has the power to cast the demons out. And so he falls at Jesus' feet, but there's nothing worshipful about that. He says to him at the top of his voice in verse 7, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" Do you guys see how that might answer the disciples' questions from the previous chapter? Who is this that even the winds and the waves obey him? Now the impure spirit speaks up and says, "You are Jesus. What do you want with us, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" We get a glimpse at Jesus' identity, even though it comes from the voice of an impure spirit. We know who he is. He's Jesus, Son of the Most High God, which is a really powerful statement because Jesus is not in Israel. He's in the Decapolis, the place where there are lots of different gods who are worshipped. And this demon recognizes that even in a place where there are lots of different gods, a pluralism of gods, maybe like our own society where pluralism is becoming far and far more popular, there's only one that's most high. One that rules above them all, right? And that's Jesus. What do you want with us, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? He falls at his feet. But he's such a hypocrite. Doesn't it seem like well, we're talking impure spirits here. They're hypocritical. You see what he asked Jesus? He says, "In God's name, don't torture me." Anybody recognize how he's been treating this man? He's been torturing him. And now he's asking Jesus for mercy. I just find it ironic. Find it kind of interesting. Give me mercy. In God's name, give me mercy. You know, when it comes to impure spirits, they typically recognize Jesus before he even reveals himself. That's the case in this story, right? The man sees Jesus from a distance and comes running down at him. He knows who he is. It's not the first time. In Mark chapter 1, in verse 24, there's another impure spirit, and when he sees Jesus, he says, "What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." These impure spirits, these demons, seem to have access to information that maybe we don't have. But they know who Jesus is. They recognize his authority, but there's no salvation in that. James says something like that, right? He says, you believe there's one God? Good. Even the demons believe there's one God, but they shudder. See, there's a lot of people that might recognize the authority of Jesus. It doesn't do them much good unless they fall and worship, right? And I'm talking people here. Even demons believe God and they shudder. And that's this man. He's filled with not just one demon, but an army of demons. When Jesus says to him, come out of this man, you impure spirit, and then Jesus asks him name, he says, my name is Legion, he replied, for we are many. A legion is a group of soldiers, right? Roman soldiers. Could be up to 6,000 soldiers in a legion. Here's the cool thing about Jesus. Like in this story, he is facing an army of impure spirits. Not one, an army of impure spirits. And you want to know who Jesus is? He's got power over them all. With a word, he can cast them out. You want an answer to the disciples' questions, who is this that can control the wind and the waves? Well, it's the same person that can defeat an army of impure spirits with a word. He is Jesus, Son of the Most High God. But let's talk about the pigs for a second. Because, of course, when I started teaching this, it's interesting Robert's back here because Robert was in my original youth group, like the first one that I started as well. Yeah. And we were on John Street. We had a lot of fun. But when I first started teaching, I would teach stories like this, and typically the kids had the same problem with the story. It was always, do you really believe in demons? Right? That was the question I had to answer as I went through a story like this. Do you really believe in demons? Because, well, when was that? It was like the early 2000s, right? Like the early 2000s. Skepticism was at an all-time high, right? And today it's not so much. People accept spiritual matters, right? I mean, I don't have to convince teenagers today in the truth of God, the presence of angels, demons. They tend to believe that there's some kind of spiritual forces at work, right? They might see it in nature. They might see it in dream catchers, like all those outside things. But they tend to believe that there is some kind of spiritual element to this life. But now the question they ask is, how could Jesus have killed those 2,000 pigs? That's what they want to know. They want to understand, like, what about animal rights? That's what they want to know, right? And the one thing I want to say here is that just because Jesus sends the impure spirits into the pigs doesn't mean Jesus is responsible for their death. It is the demons that drive the pigs over the side of the mountain, not Jesus. And so we can't really lay the blame at his feet, but he does allow the demons to go there. You might wonder, like, well, who is it? Like, why? I wrote this down. It has nothing to do with my point, but I think it's important. It says, just because a group is in the same formation doesn't mean they're going in the right course. I'm going to skip over that, but just think about that for a second. All these pigs are going they're all in one formation, going the right course. Maybe it's not always good to follow the crowd. But my point that I really want to make is that Jesus cares. He cared about the pigs. He cares about sparrows. Let's use birds as an example. In Matthew chapter 10, Jesus says this, verse 29, he says, are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside of your Father's care. And even the very hairs of your head are numbered. So don't be afraid. You are worth far more than many sparrows. If Jesus cares about sparrows, he also probably cares about the pigs, right? But he cares about the man more. That's the point. He cares about the man more. And so he allows the demons to go into the pigs. The demons are the ones responsible for the death. But there's a symbolism to all of this too, right? It's not just that Jesus shows up into an impure land, but he cleanses the man, and the animals themselves that are unclean are cleansed as well. I think an early Jewish audience probably would have clapped at this story, right? Because they didn't grow up with a crush on Miss Piggy, right? But they would have clapped because to them, well, there's lots of stories of Jews being forced to eat pork as a form of punishment or forcing them to compromise. And so maybe for them it was like, well, it would have been like seeing rats jump off the side of a mountain. They would have saw what Jesus did as cleansing the outside nation. But we have a harder time seeing like that because our perspective is different today. We grew up with, well, I love bacon. Miss Piggy is still a favorite of mine, right? There's lots of things out there, but I think there's the point here is that Jesus liberates. He cares about people more than pigs, and he heals the man. Now just compare and contrast the two. Satan comes to steal, kill, destroy. Jesus comes to give life to the abundance. And when you see what Satan does with this man, he wants him isolated. He wants him chained up. He wants him howling like a dog and cutting himself in pain. That's what the enemy wants. But Jesus comes to set him free of all of that. And later we're going to find this man sitting in community and being told to go back to his own people. See, Jesus set this man free. There are really two forces at work in our world. The question is, which one are you following? The evil one or Jesus? The evil one comes, steal, kill, destroy. Jesus comes to give life. I want to be on that side. How about you? But you know, the fact is, even though I think that's the right side to be, not everybody will choose it. Right? That's my third point, by the way. My third point is people respond differently to Jesus. You're going to see in this story two different responses to Jesus. And I think it's appropriate to kind of think through. They all see the same evidence, right? They all see liberation versus incarceration. But the same sun that will melt the wax often bakes the clay, right? That's how it is. You see the same miracle, but you don't respond to it in the same way. And listen to what happens in verse 14. It says, those tending the pigs ran off and reported this to the town and countryside. And the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they saw a man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Who were they afraid of? Maybe the man. They couldn't bind him. They're the ones that kicked him out of the community, tied him up. They had no control over him. But I think they're more afraid of Jesus. Because no matter how hard they tried to control this man, Jesus subdued him with the word. He cleansed him just by saying, come out. It's the power of Jesus that they saw. They recognized that whoever this man is has power over an army of demons. Whoever this man is has power over the wind and the waves. And they're terrified. They're afraid. They see the miracle, but these people say this. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man and told him about the pigs as well. Then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave the region. Isn't that one response to Jesus? You can see all the fantastic things that he does. You can see the liberation that is possible when you accept him. But sometimes it's easier to tell him to leave. And I have a couple theories on why they might have told him to leave. Primarily about money. Because I'm sure that those people in the city had some kind of interest in the pigs that flew off the mountain. Right? And you know, religion is good. And it can be tolerated inside of a community, so long as it doesn't demand certain life changes. Once it starts to demand life changes, that's when people get a little bit afraid of it, right? That's when people start to push it away because they don't want to change their life too much. In the book of Acts, Ken's been going through it. There's the story of Paul and Silas and Timothy as they go to Philippi, and they're there and they're preaching, and they meet this woman who can tell the future, and she's filled with the Spirit, and she goes around and she bugs Paul to the point he casts the Spirit out of her. You think the community would be up in arms, like excited, this woman has been set free. Instead, they have Paul and Silas arrested and taken to the town authorities. Because this Jesus is very powerful, but he impacts their pocketbook. I've talked to people as well who aren't willing to commit to Jesus because they're more afraid of what it might take away from their life. Not just financially. Sometimes just they don't want to commit to Jesus because it requires giving something up. And so they ask him to leave. Or it requires picking something up. Jesus says, anybody who wants to come after me must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. And for some people, they will see that high cost and they'll say, Jesus, leave. It's too much. I don't want to stop my bad behavior. I don't want to take on extra commitments. Just leave. It's too much. And that's one way that you can respond to Jesus. And you got to live with the consequences of that. You'll find yourself alone, isolated, acting more like an animal than somebody created in the image of God. Second response is the response of the man. And because Jesus, by the way, acknowledges what they say. The next verse says, as Jesus was getting in the boat. So when they asked Jesus to leave, he left. Kind of sad, right? They asked Jesus to leave and he left. He honored what they asked. Verse 18, he's getting in the boat. The man who had been demon possessed, begged to go with him. That's your response to Jesus. If you're looking for one, it should look a lot like begging. Jesus, can I just follow you? I will give everything up if I can just follow you in the boat. Just go along with you. That's the response Jesus is going for. And it's so sad. Jesus tells this man, no. He didn't let him go. And I felt bad for the man. Maybe you did too. I mean, he'd been isolated, living in tombs. Finally, this guy shows up and he's the Messiah. He's the Son of the Most High God. And he sets him free from the army of demons that have been living inside of him. And he just wants to be close to Jesus. But Jesus says, no, you need to go back to your own people. And that's what he does. But Jesus tells him to do this. Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you. By the way, the Lord is Jesus. Go tell people about what Jesus has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. Not just what he's done for you, but how it impacted you. That's our response. Beg Jesus to be able to go in the boat, but then go out and share that message with an outside world that needs it, with the world that needs mercy. Do you guys look around in our world and see people needing mercy? Do you see people like this man living in an unclean circumstance and all they need is somebody like Jesus to come alongside them? But that's you, because as the church, you embody Christ to one another and to your community. You get to be that person who can come along next to somebody who's struggling and needs help, and you can set him free. Not because you have the power to do so, but because you are in Christ. That's the power of the gospel, by the way. It breaks the chains that hold people down. And so, I guess, as we come to this, that's my last point, as we come to the end, I guess we can compare and contrast. What does the enemy want? He wants to steal, kill, destroy. What does Jesus want? He wants to give life, and to the abundance. He sets the man free, gives him a new life. Go tell people what the Lord has done for you. How do you respond? Well, you could be like the townspeople. Following Jesus just costs too much. Please leave. Or you could be like the man who begs and is commissioned to go and share the message. So the real question is, how will you respond tonight? How will you respond in your obedience? You can go back to the world of isolation, sadness, brokenness, or you can come to Jesus who gives life to the abundance.